Hildegard's here. It's Friday, and we have John-Berling-Hardy joining us here. And this is going to be interesting because Hildegard hasn't been involved in our interviews before, and we're kind of...
She's new to the game.
New
to the game, but not new to the man. We had the privilege of meeting before.
Yes, in a previous incarnation.
Somewhere
in the Middle Ages, in a
Dr.
small
John's
hamlet.
place at some point. I think we met in a meditation
yes,
circle.
at the Sandale Circle.
House? Yeah.
Yes, Gaddy and John were. He was the den of iniquity there. Yes, it was. So here we are again.
Yeah. All souls back together.
Yes, quite.
So we're talking about the game, and today we're going to be talking about the private aspect, how it affects us as private people.
Which is, in a sense, the most expensive aspect of it, in the sense that I would say that the game is almost, like to talk about the game would be, let's say, if one was a fish, to talk to a fish about water would be next to meaningless because the fish couldn't even imagine anything but water because it never experienced life outside of water. That's more or less our approach or how we experience the game. The moment I would probably imagine it's a time we learn language, that we're actually brought into our culture, we're brought into linearity, we're given an identity, and the internal dialogue, all of that which we presume to be us, the me, is actually a role that we've been given. So it goes that deep. So each individual comes in there. It's as if you took a bunch of people and you threw them into a soap opera, and then they had amnesia and they didn't know of any of their previous identity. And now, from this point on, they are that character, and they played out. And so, to get out of this, to reach enlightenment, is extremely challenging because you really have to deconstruct that which you are.
Well, first of all, I guess one would have to also question what is. Like really deeply question. Like if I put myself in the position of a fish in water, I'm not sure I'd even have a concept of water.
Precisely.
Because I'm living, doing what I do, going about what fishes do.
Exactly.
So I would not have that label water, and I wouldn't understand that it can be in a bucket or in a river.
But exactly.
So it's in that, I think I hear you say is we have to actually question the status quo, not just in one area, but on all levels.
Well, ultimately it's the only way out, because you have to keep drilling in until you get down to the last thing we want to put on the chopping block is ourselves in terms of what's up. Because if we're not this person, then who are we? So it's the ultimate existential dilemma that every individual is placed in. If I'm not that role, who am I?
So
hugely problematic.
You're using a couple of terms here which maybe need defining. Maybe you have defined it, but maybe for our viewers who haven't really followed the conversation or are new to it, how do you define the game? And then you talk about personality and identity. How do you define that?
Actually, I have defined the game for other viewers.
You have defined. Okay, then
yes,
good. I'm not sure if it's needed, but
in detail.
But let's talk about it.
But let's just say the game essentially, what it is, it's this way in which we naturally organize ourselves. So, in other words, spontaneously, you take any group, you'll take these individuals who are the players, who have particular skills at manipulating others. They also identify with other players in a way that they would separate themselves from others, so that a player will identify with another player regardless of culture, and in fact it goes across culture, and they will take over the group. So it doesn't matter what group you find, they will co-opt the group, because once again this game is not declared. They have no incentive to declare it. So what happens is you have the players who are now organizing them. They instinctively, immediately, the moment they're in a group, their entire objective, take the group. Okay, so there's a bunch of people around the table. Players are basically saying, we're going to take the group. They're not going to even, this will never be stated. It'll just be understood. Then over time, what they'll do is they set up a hierarchy out of this group. So they'll have the players at the top. They'll have the people who are the most compliant closest to them, because the ones who they can most easily manipulate and who they can gain some benefit from. And then the people who are free spirits and the people who are less inclined to participate in something like this, what they have to do as well at the same time is marginalize them, right? So all of this is going on continuously, all the time, as we speak, real time.
This
right?
is group dynamics, human relations.
Exactly. We are a group animal. We don't exist in a vacuum. So this is part of our social DNA.
You see that in grade 1. You see that in, like in
exactly.
daycare.
Anywhere.
It starts right from the very beginning.
That's
and
right.
it plays itself out in corporations at the highest level.
So you say it's socialized. We have been conditioned.
No, it's actually so deep in us. I would almost say it's our social DNA. So that we are social animals, just like wolves.
Right.
So just like wolves would have a certain pattern of interacting, this is part of our basic interactive pattern. Now, because it's so deep inside us, it just happens quasi automatically. It's happening all the time. It's hard even to notice.
This is like why it's like water to a fish.
Precisely. So what it also acts as is that in order for this group to function, everybody has to, it's almost like a theater group. Everybody has to stay in their role. And this is the game that actually, the mechanism that forces everyone to stay in their bubble. This bubble being the identity, the ego, right? So what you have is the external part, this force field that is keeping us all in the bubble.
Because people, John, they have their own self-concept, right?
Exactly.
And
we have to, otherwise we're insane.
Well, and so you take that self-concept out into the world, but sometimes you get into a certain situation, and other people are putting you they're defining you in a way that maybe you don't quite define yourself, right? This is why sometimes, you need to leave groups, because the bubble that you've been put in is partly also a result of the other people in the group.
Okay, that'll be in the context, let's say, of external groups. So you've got your original bubble, let's say. And now you move into this group and there's another bubble placed on top of it. Well, you can leave that group because you can let go of that bubble because you've got a bubble beneath. Mm-hmm. But this is the first bubble. We've got nothing below this bubble. And so to actually let go of this is something that is inconceivable.
Because that's your self-concept.
Well, yeah, it's almost like saying to if I were to say to you, Hildegard, if you were not Hildegard, who would you be? Right? It's just, how can Hildegard answer that question? It has to be something else, some other entity that answers that question.
Well, interesting question. How can I talk about something that I'm not aware of? I know what I know, and I know what I don't know. Like, I can't fly an airplane, I'm not speaking Chinese. However, I can talk about the things that I have no awareness of.
Precisely.
Right? So what I hear you saying is we are in this process, like there is a certain dynamics that is so internalized, it's almost as if it's in our DNA. Maybe it is even programmed in the DNA. And yet I hear you say there is a way to go beyond it.
There is.
Because earlier we were talking about questioning the status quo.
Exactly, which the fish cannot do.
Right.
Because the thing is, the fish cannot project itself, in a sense, outside itself. For instance, what we can do is imagine ourselves at a point on the wall looking back at ourselves, right? We can do that.
Well, in a relatively psychologically healthy frame of mind, there are people who probably can't do that. Like, this is what...
No, but let's just say, let's even get it down to the simplest basis.
Right.
We'll get deeper into this, but let's just say, can you imagine yourself, let's say if you were to imagine yourself right now, how you appear if you were sitting there looking back at yourself?
Of course, I can do
exactly,
that.
right.
I can also put myself in your shoes and project myself there.
All of that.
To
but
get to understand you better, hopefully.
All of
right?
that. Those are deeper levels of that. But the first level is to actually break yourself out of this local point, right, in time and space. Because the thing is, the moment you can do that, you have perspective. Now, when you extend that metaphor and you start to get deeper into, let's just say if I'm looking at the person, I'm projecting myself into them, now I'm not just on the surface of them, I'm actually going into their makeup, now I'm going at deeper levels of me, etc. Now, once you go through this process, you're now starting to break out of this mold. This is the process of mindfulness, actually, what the Buddhists talk about. And it's actually, that's the point of it. Because without this mindfulness, we're actually completely trapped in a robotic existence, which is governed by the game. It's in a sense that simple, but that difficult. Because the thing is, let's just say we're even successful to some extent in actually breaking free. So let's say an example. One of the things that I found helpful was once I created actually a character, or when I was learning languages, I found a very efficient way to learn languages was to create this almost buffoon-like character in that language, and then imagine I was that character. And then that somehow took the pressure, etc., and I'm playing this character. But as I did this, what I realized, the moment I created this new character, I now had perspective back on the other character I was playing. Now I can actually see it as a character. So it's just like, for instance, the first time you experience yourself on Earth is when you go to the moon and you come back to Earth. Mm-hmm. Then you're conscious that you're on Earth. Up to that point, you're basically just here, somewhere. And once you start to break this, now you've got another dilemma, which is, okay, let's just say I actually reach some higher self and something else which is beyond this role that I've been playing. Well, now what do I do? If it's like being sane in the mental asylum.
Well, it sounds to me what you're addressing here is that process of awakening in consciousness. You're breaking through.
Absolutely.
Like a toddler in a playpen, let's say of 9 months of age, can be lifted out by a 4-year-old, which has a different frame of reference, different skills. And while we are physically aware of that evolution, on this planet, we don't really talk too much, at least not in the Western world that I grew up in, about that spiritual evolution, that part of us that is actually not bound by physicality.
Exactly.
And we don't have the education on how to really access these parts and become comfortable while we're losing the frame of references in the
Precisely, and for a reason. This is by design. But the education system is actually designed to do the very opposite of this. By design, it's not an accident. It is to lock us into that three-dimensional figure.
So we are focused on the physical only.
Ultimately, and even the physical aspect of ourselves. In other words, I have value if I can earn money. My idea has value if I have a book. It is, well, how many did you sell? Was it published? Does it make money? Why do you make money? Because it's contributing to the society. Well, what is this? And all of these types of things all are circular reasoning that bring us back and that make it so that only things that relate back to the game are valid. And so what I would say my part is in this whole equation of reaching enlightenment is what I found was lacking was the discussion of that which keeps us locked in. Because it's not, it's one thing to conceive of enlightenment, but in reality, enlightenment was there all the time. We're always sort of enlightened. It's just that there's this overlay on top of us.
Well, and is this really so for everybody, or is it a unique overlay or unique stuckness?
Oh no, it's
a unique thing.
It's totally generic. Totally. Like for instance, if you take a look at our motivations and you take a look at this false self, this role, and you look at the motivators, the way it responds to certain stimuli, etc. I mean, people who understand crowds, we're essentially all having exactly the same illusion that we're individuals, and at the same time, we're all sharing the illusion of being an individual while being just like the person beside us. And the person beside us is equally deluded into believing that they're an individual.
Well, to me, that is an unfair assumption, and it's not provable. Because how can you prove that I live in the same illusion you live in? I'm not saying that I'm not living in an illusion.
I'll tell you that the markets do it beautifully. Like, for instance, when you're playing the markets, it's based on that premise.
I recognize the systems. However, there might be a wealth of people, and I know quite a few of them, and at some level, I like to believe that I'm not hooking into some of these concepts anymore. Because...
No, it doesn't mean that you cannot... Once you've elevated yourself up from these... That's another thing. But in terms of our starting point, where we enter the board of the game,
it's the same bubble like that each and everyone has to break through? Or is it not a unique bubble that based on our awareness or lack thereof is unique.
Not particularly.
I'm not saying that we are not in this prison.
No, I think actually our attachment to this uniqueness is a false uniqueness. I think that our uniqueness lies beyond the bubble. But to the extent that we're in the bubble, in fact, on the road to getting out, and it's the same thing as an investor, the first time you start being a novice trader, the biggest difference I would say between a novice trader and then a somewhat more experienced trader is the illusion that they are unique in the way they're responding to the market. When they start to realize that they're responding exactly the same way as everybody else, now they have a leg up. They actually realize that their first response is actually generic, and now they can distance themselves from it. But to the extent that they're still within it, they cannot. And I would say this is a metaphor for life as well, that on this basic level, we are so incredibly generic, the way we respond. In terms of the lower self?
Oh, hang on. Are we talking responding or reaction?
Either. But
because
what I'm just saying,
response takes already a more advanced awareness.
I would say that, in fact, we are reacting. Even when we think we're responding, at that level, it's all reactional.
Okay.
It's just more complex, more sophisticated reactions with a certain cognitive layer thrown in. But yeah, we're basically robotic. Once we break out of that, is when we're actually reaching that part of ourselves which is, I would say, yes, unique to us. But even that quality of uniqueness is a very different kind of uniqueness. Because, for instance, that uniqueness, the higher self's uniqueness, does not need to express itself in a particular outer presentation or in really anything. It doesn't have a need to express its individuality.
So let me step back for one moment. Oh, go ahead.
Okay,
Yes?
go ahead, Hildegard.
You were saying that we are in this bubble, and we have to get out of it. And we have to get.
Yes.
So my question is: does everybody have the same opportunity to find their way out, to become conscious that they are in this game?
I don't know.
And what triggers one to step out?
Ultimately, it's because you're not happy in it. I mean, at the end of the day, what is it? If you're successful in this game, if you're one of the players and things are going your way, the likelihood of you stepping out is incredibly low. So ultimately, it's because you're not happy in it. Now, what is it that makes you unhappy in it? And I would say this is essentially what I would describe as the anti-player, is that they have something in their basic nature. And so I would actually answer the question as no, we're not equal in our likelihood of breaking out. Because I would say that there are some of us who come into this world, and a limited number, who come into this world with this such an innately strong sense of this other self that the conditioning of the bubble doesn't really take. It becomes a soft membrane instead of a hard membrane. It doesn't really take. It takes somewhat, but not fully. And it's these individuals who ultimately will be on the road first. Absolutely, because it's so difficult for them being inside the bubble, because they're not comfortable in it. They're always under tension.
You know, John, I'm thinking, as you say, funny that you should mention on the road, because
Yes.
I was thinking that, you know, some of the beatniks and the hippies that came out in the 50s
Jack
and
Kerouac.
60s.
Yeah.
Exactly, Jack Kerouac on the road, they were the first people to kind of, on a macro cultural level, say, you know, something's wrong with the culture. We're going to break out of what our expectations have been. But just going back, you said earlier, and we don't have a lot of time left, but you said earlier that this is one of the most expensive problems that even an individual can have in their life. I mean,
well, it is, because it finally, when you engage with this, now you're really having to take your entire life and put it under scrutiny and say everything that I think, everything that I value, ultimately you have to accept it on some level because it's based on that character who is only a character. It is only in some way sort of peripherally true. There's a true aspect to it, but in its hard reality, no, it's so far from true. It's an illusion. And that's very, very difficult to do.
So how do you find your true self and transcend your character, your personality?
I would say it's more like it's like in The Wizard of Oz. it's pulling back the veil. When Toto pulls back the veil to see Oz beneath the great Oz, it's the pulling back of the veil. So because we are that individual, and because this projection is the game of like projecting and holding this projection of the false self on top of us and or around us, encasing us, the moment we start to let go of it, and we just let go of it, which takes enormous courage, because how do you let go of a window? And if you believe you're on the 5th story and you're hanging onto a window, what is going to induce you to let go of that window? Absolute pure trust and faith. That's the ultimate, like Kierkegaard talks about, the pure test of faith. And that is ultimately what it takes. At a certain point, and then the question is, what gives us the capacity for that faith? And I think what it is just that we open the crack enough so that the basic sense of God, the true self, this true light, we connect to it enough to allow us to pry the door open further. And what it'll often be, it'll be some circumstance. It could be a child being born. It could be someone dying. It could be a near-death experience. It could be
a trigger.
Like something crucial, but something incredibly powerful that somehow twigs and opens that door. And I think what it is often, it's several of these little moments. And then at a certain point, it starts to pry open and it stays open. And when it stays open long enough, then you can start to really push it open. And it's an extremely difficult and painful process. Is it worth it? Absolutely. I mean, I think it's why we're here.
Well, I think we're all in each other's space for a reason, right? I'm just thinking of one of the books by Rudolf Steiner, who wrote about this accessing higher worlds.
Yes,
and what we are going through might be naturally an evolution that is innate and is part of what human life is all about.
Well, for instance, the game. Even the game itself is creating the opposition for this to happen. So on a higher level, the tension created by the game, the tension created by this false self, when now the true self, which is now trying to break free. If we take a look at that tension, it's creative tension ultimately, because without tension, you have no creativity, you have nothing, right? So in a way, the game is that negative polarity.
Well, it's like the electrical currents in the wall,
precisely.
Right? The positive and the negative.
Otherwise, we would just be in bliss.
Light, so it's actually a very good thing.
So I would actually say, if I were to describe the game in that sense, the game is my metaphor or attempt to break down actually the entire negative polarity, what it looks like beneath the surface. How it's
on an individual basis?
Not just collectively too, because how the game plays out.
But what would you recommend to people on wrapping it up here? What is your advice to them? Somebody who is caught in this dilemma, becoming aware of the game, and they want to now take steps to be more authentic, more true to their true self, or exploring what that actually is. Is there anything you would like to leave people with for today?
Actually, I would really, it would just be to actually, as the world's spinning, try standing still. Just taking moments out, even during conversations or anything, and try standing still, because it's like the whole thing is a spin. It keeps us going.
And we react to it.
And we're reacting. The moment you even just stop, and just stop the wheel, and now start to watch, and then start to ask the question, you just keep asking the question, you're on the way out.
So
John,
beautiful.
John, I just want to,
awesome.
Because this might be our last little talk here on Liquid Lunch. I know you're going to be doing other stuff with Mom
exactly, the other shows,
stuff like that,
which will be more specific to the business application of this.
But I'm thinking of it. This is really a problem that people who pay the biggest price are human individuals, right? People who are not happy in their life, right? You know, to apply that at a corporate level, it's almost like the corporation exists to win the game. Right? It's
well, the corporation, in a sense, is like the mechanism through which they hold us into the game. The bigger, the better.
Right. So it's like almost the wrong environment to
Actually, no, because what would end up happening, though, is that the organization or any environment, once it would engage with this and once it would shift over to this, would cease to be an organization in the sense that we think of organization.
Yeah.
Because it's literally the word organized would no longer be applicable.
Right.
It would be, but we could even think of it as a harmonization.
Yeah.
As opposed to so it's just like, for instance, you take a look at, imagine an orchestra that now turns into a jazz ensemble.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's almost like because people, a lot of people, free spirits especially in your model, look at the world and say there's something wrong with the world. One day,
which is the Christian promise.
Exactly. We have as individuals we want to break out of it, but one day when everybody breaks out of it, the world will be changed. The lambs will lie down with the lions, and everyone will live happily ever after.
Ultimately.
And I think that's if you were to apply this in an organization, you're going to create the kind of organization that's ready for that new world when it comes.
Well, and not just ready, they'll actually be experiencing it.
It sounds like you're talking, you are building a community versus a corporate entity that is there to keep certain things in a certain place.
And not building it so much as allowing it to spontaneously transform itself into.
Beautiful.
And this is the point. It wouldn't be building because that's a linear concept.
You're right.
And that's why it's so difficult, because all our thinking, even the words, as we get to it, we have to, and yet we do have the words. It's just about seeing things from that perspective. But I think harmonization, concepts like that, confluence, flow, harmonization, are ultimately where this goes. Because the moment we try to anticipate what this will look like, once again, we're back into the game.
Well, this is it. We have to kind of allow things to...
And that's the key word, allowance.
In line with universal law, come together naturally.
Exactly.
And that's what I find actually very beautiful here.
It's interesting. That's why a tree looks like a tree and a mountain looks like a mountain.
Precisely.
But a building in downtown Toronto looks like a great big box.
And they all look the same.
Yeah.
And you look at all the things that are built exactly.
So we're coming back to our nature and hopefully become more in harmony with our true nature as individuals, and then we will harmonize like the tree.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right, John.
That's right.
Beautiful.
Well, it's been great to have this series of conversations, and we'll be seeing more of you here on that channel.
Yes.
And people, of course.
Thank you, Hildegard, and thank you, Hugh.
You're welcome. And your email address is there. People can get in touch with you and get the party started.
Okay. Excellent.
Okay.
Yes, this was very good. It was a pleasure.
It was great. Okay. Thank you, John. Okay, who do we have next, Hildegard?
Next, we'll have Jenny, and we will learn about how we can actually regrow our hair.
Excellent. That's what I've been waiting for. We'll be right back. LiquidLunch.ThatChannel.com.
Now we'll get